If you don't want a divorce, then get out of this house right now. These harsh words came suddenly from my husband, catching me completely off guard. He was clearly sure I wouldn't go through with a divorce, to be so bold as to threaten me like that. I had been trying to hold it together for so long, but that moment pushed me to my limit. I decided it was time to seek help from someone else. My name is Saffron, and I'm 28 years old, working in an office. My husband, Wilder, and I are about to hit our 5th wedding anniversary. We've been hoping for a child, but we're still waiting for that blessing. Because of this, my mother-in-law constantly pesters me, always asking when she'll get grandchildren. My father-in-law passed away several years ago, and my mother-in-law now lives comfortably on the inheritance he left behind. But her endless questions about grandchildren have me on the edge of a breakdown. Actually, I might already be there. Despite watching me struggle, Wilder does nothing to help. In fact, he's recently started siding with his mother, blaming me for everything. I used to love him for his kindness back when we were dating, but after we got married, everything about him changed. Without even asking for my opinion, he decided that we'd live near his childhood home. Now, every time I have a day off work, I'm called over to his parents' house to do housework all day long. Of course, there are no breaks. While I'm busy cleaning and doing chores, my husband and his mother either go out together or sit around watching TV, laughing. Once, I even got scolded for making too much noise while vacuuming. After that, they banned me from using the vacuum altogether, telling me to clean with just a broom and a rag. Then, to make things worse, my sister-in-law moved back home. She had been living in a nearby town, but after some issues with her neighbors, she moved back in with her mother. Her return only made things harder for me. She has a 4-year-old daughter and expects me to prepare lunch for her every single day. When I explained that it wasn't possible because of my job, my mother-in-law scolded me, saying, "Your sister-in-law is going through a tough time after her divorce." Then my husband chimed in, "Don't you want to be useful to the family?" My sister-in-law even had the nerve to say, "It'll be good practice for when you have a child, so you should be grateful." So now, I get up at 4 a.m. every morning to make my niece's lunch, cook breakfast for my in-laws, and then rush back to my own place to finish my housework before heading to my job. That's the exhausting routine I'm stuck in. And of course, my husband still doesn't lift a finger to help with any of the chores. The only time I can catch a break is during work hours. But one day, after enduring this tiring schedule for months, Wilder dropped a bombshell on me. "Oh, by the way, Saffron, you should quit your job," he said casually. "What?" I replied, totally shocked. "I've talked it over with my mom and my sister. She's having a hard time. You understand, don't you?" "No, I don't understand," I said, not believing what I was hearing.
"Listen," he snapped.
"I mean, quit your job and take care of the house." Then, without giving me a chance to respond, he stormed off to take a bath. I couldn't believe he was seriously suggesting that I give up my job because of his sister's situation. His job isn't stable, and there are even months where I earn more than him. Did he really think we could survive on his salary alone? Both his mother and sister don't work, and I couldn't understand why they couldn't handle the housework themselves. Feeling completely overwhelmed, I grabbed my car keys and left. I found myself driving to the only place that came to mind, my childhood home. It's far from the apartment where we live now, and since my parents moved overseas, the house has been empty. My parents are the worrying type, so I couldn't bring myself to tell them what was going on. Whenever I felt like everything was too much, I'd come here. The house is filled with warm memories from my childhood, and it always made me feel safe. As I was lost in thought, my phone rang. It was Wilder. "Hey, I just got out of the bath and you're gone. Are you at your parents' place again?" "Yes, so what?" I answered. "Could you stop running away to your parents' house every time something goes wrong?" "We're not kids," he said, sounding frustrated. Wilder always loved my parents' home, but his words didn't move me at all. "I'll be staying here for a while, and no, I'm not going to your parents' house either," I told him. "Well, come back home now," he demanded. Giving in to his insistence, I reluctantly returned to our house. Shortly after that, I made the heartbreaking decision to quit my job in the fashion industry, something I had truly loved. My coworkers, clueless about the real reason, assumed I was pregnant. They couldn't have been more wrong. Now, I had no free time. Every day, I was responsible for managing the entire household, from dawn till dusk. Even when I caught a cold and had a fever, no one cared. I was no longer a wife. I had become nothing more than a servant in my own home. But then, something happened that I didn't expect. My sister-in-law announced she was getting remarried. Not only that, but her fiancé was an executive at a major company and made a very comfortable living.
The news was a shock to me.
My sister-in-law wasn't exactly the most pleasant person, and she wasn't known for her looks either. Still, I knew there are all kinds of people in the world, and some might find her charming. The whole family was celebrating, excited about her marrying into wealth. My sister-in-law, full of pride, showed me a photo of her fiancé. As I looked at it, I thought, wait a second, I've seen this man before. And then my husband said something I couldn't believe. Saffron, your parents' house will become my sister's family home now. Wait a minute, that house is what my parents left for me. It's not for you to decide. I snapped, unable to believe what I was hearing. My husband looked at me with a smug grin and said, the whole family has already decided. You, who live off my money, don't have a say in this. Was the man standing in front of me even human? He looked like a devil in disguise. That house was left to me by my father, as a place I could live if I ever had children. Wilder knew this. How could he be so heartless and selfish? My heart was breaking. Then, as if things couldn't get worse, my mother-in-law chimed in. You can't even give us a grandchild. Can't you at least be useful around the house? I realized there was no one on my side in this house. Feeling completely defeated, I went home, packed a few of my belongings, and headed to my parents' house. I made a firm decision in my heart. I would never go back. A few days passed without any calls from Wilder. For a brief moment, I thought maybe he had reconsidered. Then, out of nowhere, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, there stood my husband and his sister. What are you doing here? I asked, feeling tense. We thought we'd take a look around, my sister-in-law said, pushing past me as if she owned the place. Despite my attempts to stop them, they ignored me completely and wandered through the house, snooping around like it was their property. They treated me as if I were invisible. This house is pretty nice. Too nice for you, Saffron, my sister-in-law sneered. Then, without a hint of shame, my husband added, when are you planning to move out of here, Saffron? My sister's wedding is coming up soon, and we need this house. I stood there in silence, trying to process the audacity of their words. Sensing my hesitation, my husband smugly said, if you don't want a divorce, leave now. His overconfidence was unbearable, as he clearly believed I would never have the courage to leave him. He grinned at his sister, knowing he thought he had won. Got it, I finally said, watching the satisfaction spread across his face. With that, they left, excited about their family trip, which, of course, I wasn't invited to. Wilder had told me to pack my things and be out of the house by the time they returned. As I watched them leave, I allowed myself a small, bitter smile. 2 weeks later, the day they were supposed to return from their trip, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. It was my husband, calling over and over again, with some calls from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law mixed in. Finally, I answered, unable to ignore the noise any longer. Hey, Saffron, where the hell are you? Wilder barked. I'm at home, I replied calmly. Liar. You're not at the apartment or your parents' place. And what's the meaning of this? He demanded. What are you talking about? I asked, genuinely confused. Your parents' house. There's a for sale sign out front, he yelled. Yeah, I put it up for sale, I replied, my voice steady.
What? What are you talking about?
His voice was filled with disbelief. Well, after you all left, I gave it some thought. The house just seemed so dirty, and you know how I like things to be clean. Oh, and by the way, I'm divorcing you. Don't mess with me, Saffron, Wilder shouted. That was going to be my line, I said calmly. Let's talk to our lawyers from now on. Then I hung up on him mid-rant. Before my in-laws had even returned, I had reached out to a friend of my father's who worked in real estate. I didn't know the first thing about selling a house, but he gave me helpful advice, and we were able to secure a great deal. As a side note, The apartment we had been living in was actually under my name, as Wilder couldn't pass the screening process when we first applied. So, since I no longer intended to live there, I canceled the lease and sent all of his belongings to his parents' house, cash on delivery. Even after this, the calls from my in-laws didn't stop. They left all sorts of nasty messages on my voicemail, which I carefully recorded. According to my lawyer, Wilder was hesitating despite saying he wanted a divorce. It seemed he didn't want to lose the free labor I had provided. I thought the divorce battle would drag on, but surprisingly, my husband suddenly agreed to it. From what my lawyer told me, Wilder, his mother, and his sister all showed up at his office, insisting that they wanted the divorce finalized quickly. It seems my mother-in-law convinced him that since my sister-in-law's new husband was wealthy, they could easily hire a housekeeper and get rid of me, the barren wife. They even thought Wilder could find a younger, more suitable wife. With that, he agreed to the divorce. To my surprise, they even offered me a small settlement on the condition that I would have no further involvement with their family. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. After everything, that was supposed to be my line. Still, I accepted the offer. Not long after, my sister-in-law remarried, and for a while, things were finally quiet. Taking care of just myself turned out to be much easier than I ever imagined. I couldn't help but wonder why I hadn't divorced sooner. I was finally free and ready to enjoy my new life. Just as I began to embrace that thought, something unexpected happened. One day, out of nowhere, my in-laws showed up at my new home. Before I could even react, they barged in and my ex-husband demanded, "We need to talk. Sit down." Although I wondered who they thought they were, I took a seat. Then he said, "Come back home. We forgive you." I stared at them, my mouth hanging open in shock. "Excuse me?" I replied, eager to get rid of them. I decided to push their buttons. "Oh, are you here because your sister's husband disappeared?" Their eyes widened in disbelief, and they stared at me as if I had just revealed a dark secret. "What do you know?" Wilder demanded. "After we registered their marriage, he vanished. We haven't been able to contact him." My mother-in-law chimed in. "On top of that, he ran off with our family's money. Did you have something to do with this? You brought us terrible fortune, you wretched daughter-in-law." I couldn't help but smile at their baseless accusations. Tired of their nonsense, I decided to reveal the truth. "Well, I didn't realize your sister liked hamburgers so much." "What are you talking about?" Wilder snapped, completely confused. "Didn't you know? Your sister's husband isn't some high-powered executive. He's just a part-timer at a fast food burger joint." At this, my sister-in-law froze, her face draining of color. She was utterly speechless. I continued my story, explaining how things unfolded. Back in my single days, my friend and I loved visiting different burger joints. There was one particular shop where an employee kept making mistakes and was constantly yelled at by the manager. That man turned out to be my sister-in-law's husband. When I started dating Wilder, he made me give up hamburgers, so I had stopped going to those places. But when my sister-in-law showed me a photo of her fiancé, I recognized him immediately. Still, I kept quiet, thinking it wasn't my place to interfere. When they barged into my home, acting as if it was theirs, I couldn't resist showing them the homepage of the burger joint. As my sister-in-law stared at her husband's picture, clearly in shock, I mentioned casually, "By the way, I visited the shop recently, and guess what? Your husband wasn't working there anymore. Seems like he's left town." Her face went pale. That's marriage fraud," she exclaimed, finally grasping the situation. "It seems so," I replied calmly, with a hint of sarcasm in my voice. "Sorry for your loss." Then my mother-in-law, who had been quiet up until this point, suddenly lashed out. "You knew about this and didn't tell us? After everything we've done for you, even though you can't have children, we took care of you." Her nonsensical accusations didn't faze me, but I decided it was time to reveal a truth I had been keeping to myself. "First of all," I said, locking eyes with her, "I'm not the reason we couldn't have kids. Maybe you should ask your son about that." My mother-in-law's face filled with shock, and she turned to Wilder, who guiltily stared at the floor. Back when we first realized we couldn't conceive, my mother-in-law insisted we get tested. The results were clear. There was nothing wrong with me, but Wilder had a very low sperm count. The doctor explained that he was the reason we couldn't have children. But when my mother-in-law asked about the test results, Wilder lied and told her that I was the one with the problem. I was furious at him, but when I tried to defend myself, they just spouted nonsense like, "You need to support your husband." From that point on, my husband and mother-in-law ganged up on me, blaming me for something that wasn't even my fault. "Look, I admit I was wrong," Wilder finally muttered, trying to salvage the situation. "But once the house is sold, we'll get a good amount of money, right? We can all live happily together again, as a family." "Yes, we've been through a lot," my mother-in-law added, "but let's get along from now on." That's when it hit me. They were only here because they wanted my money. Disgusted, I looked at them and said, "No way. I'm not getting back together with you, and I don't consider any of you family anymore." Wilder, irritated, snapped back, "Getting a little too big for your boots now, aren't you? Even if you sold the house, you barely have any savings. How do you plan to survive?" He smirked, thinking he had the upper hand, as if he knew everything about my financial situation. He must have peeked at my bank account during our marriage. The three of them were grinning at me, trying to intimidate me, but they were in for a surprise. "Sure, my savings aren't much," I said, watching their smug faces. "But I've invested in stocks, enough to live comfortably without working for the next few years." Their jaws dropped, and they stared at me in disbelief. "Actually," I continued, "my father had a keen interest in stocks and investments. He was great at predicting the market, and I inherited those skills from him. I've built up a nice amount of wealth over the years. In fact, the money that helped my parents move overseas, that was all from my investments." I had kept all of this a secret from my greedy ex-family, and now they were realizing they had no claim over me or my assets. The looks on their faces were priceless. "You can leave now," I said, standing firm. "Oh, and by the way, according to our divorce agreement, if any of you approach me without reason, you'll have to pay a penalty. So, are you going to pay up, or should I call the police for trespassing?" The word police made them panic, and they left in a hurry. After they were gone, I immediately called my lawyer and explained what had happened. He advised me to contact him if they ever tried to approach me again. As expected, once Wilder realized I had financial stability, he started bombarding me with messages, begging to reconcile. He even sent me old photos from when we were dating, along with creepy messages like, "I'm here, thinking about our past." I considered blocking him, but I decided to keep everything as evidence, just in case. It was almost laughable how he managed to send me so many texts during work hours. But honestly, I didn't care anymore. The last straw came when he started reaching out to my friends. That's when I sent him a final message. "If this continues, I'll go to the police." I attached a photo of our divorce agreement and the address of the nearest police station. After that, the messages stopped, and I never heard from Wilder again. My lawyer informed me that Wilder had actually quit his job after his sister got remarried, thinking he could live off her new husband's wealth. He was a fool, leaving a decent job at a good company. While I was handling my divorce, I had asked my lawyer to look into another matter. Shortly after Wilder and I got married, I noticed some of my personal belongings were starting to disappear. First, it was a necklace. As I continued sharing my story, I recalled how things had taken a darker turn. It all began when personal items that held sentimental value to me started disappearing. First, a necklace I had bought myself when I was still single, and then a fountain pen that my parents had gifted me when I began my job. This fountain pen meant the world to me, and its loss stung deeply. More items vanished, bags, rings, but the pen's absence hurt the most. When I approached Wilder about it, hoping for some empathy, he shouted, "Stop worrying about losing things." That reaction raised red flags. Suspicious of his behavior, I secretly installed a surveillance camera in our home without informing him. What I captured on video confirmed my worst fears. The footage showed Wilder and my mother-in-law going through my closet, rummaging through my belongings, grinning as they did it. But it didn't stop there. Once my sister-in-law moved back in, the video revealed all three of them, Wilder, my mother-in-law, and my sister-in-law, snooping through my things. They had started selling my cherished items for extra money, likely after seeing the balance in my bank book. Their behavior escalated as they saw me remaining silent. This continued right up until the divorce, but by that time, I had gathered plenty of evidence. I had enough proof of their betrayal, their theft, and their cruelty. They probably thought I wouldn't dare take any action, but they were wrong. I filed for damages and compensation for emotional distress, directly related to their actions. They must have been panicking at the prospect, but it was their own doing. As for what happened to the three of them after the truth came out, well, the consequences were poetic. My sister-in-law's ex-husband, having learned of the incident, took custody of their daughter. I was relieved because my sister-in-law had never seemed to truly care for her child. A little while ago, I saw the ex-husband and their daughter together, happily holding hands while shopping. The daughter's smile was radiant, a sight I had never seen when she was living with my in-laws. It felt like a weight had been lifted knowing she was in better hands now. As for my in-laws, their plans to live an easy life fell apart quickly. They tried applying for welfare, but since they were perfectly healthy and capable of working, their request was denied. My ex-husband's pride kept him from finding a proper job. When he finally swallowed his pride and returned to his old workplace, begging for his job back, they turned him away. In fact, they had been hoping he'd quit and had no intention of taking him back. They even called the police, which humiliated him. Now, he scrapes by with day labor jobs, far from the lifestyle he thought he'd have. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law, both of whom had to pay me compensation, were forced to find part-time jobs at a local supermarket. Neither of them had much experience working, so they struggled with even the simplest tasks. It's rumored that ever since they started working there, the supermarket sales have dropped significantly. People in the neighborhood have even given them the nickname the plague-bringing mother and daughter, as if they bring bad luck wherever they go. And the house they lived in? Well, it turns out they didn't own it after all. It was a rental. When they couldn't keep up with the rent payments, they were forced to move to a rundown apartment in a neighborhood with a bad reputation. They're living hand-to-mouth now, and from what I've heard, they're constantly arguing. Their fights got so loud recently that the police were called to break it up. The irony of it all is that their desire to control and take advantage of me led them straight to a life of misery. As for me, well, I've never been happier. Selling the house provided me with enough money to start my own business. I partnered with a colleague from my old job, and together, we launched a new apparel company. Our business has been growing, and we've even been featured in magazines and on TV. Returning to the job I love has been incredibly fulfilling, and I owe a large part of my success to what I endured. But the best news of all is that I've met someone new. Through my work, I crossed paths with a wonderful man, and we're getting married. His family is kind and loving. They've welcomed me with open arms. And the biggest blessing? We're expecting a baby. I'm finally going to be the mother I've always dreamed of being, and my life is filled with joy and love. Next year, I'll be a wife and a mother, and I've never felt more content. Everything I went through, the pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak, it all led me to this moment. I'm living the happiest chapter of my life right now, and for the first time in a long while, I'm truly at peace.